Hi Year 6, welcome back to Chapter 11 of Girl of Ink and Stars. Thank you for those of you who sent me some more of your answers to the comprehension questions. If you haven't done so already, please keep working on those and send them in. Off we go. Consulting Mars map, I took them northwest to Gris, hoping Loop's instinct would be the same as the governor's, to get out of the forest and back towards the coast. "Don't get us lost, runt," Marquez sneered. My fingers shook as I traced the path. We followed a spine of rock that ran from the waterfall's overhang, creating a natural break in the trees, and opening up a channel that the horses could travel along easily. It was a claustrophobic few hours, with the grey of the rock wall towering on the right and the grey of the tall trees rising on our left. Even the sky was unusually hazy. The whole world seemed sifted through ash. Finally, the forest began to fade, and we broke out onto a wide pebble beach, the metallic glint of the sea unrolling beside us. It was soothing after the forest, and also meant we only had to keep watch on one side, with a clear stretch to the tree line. It was easier to chart the distances with a view of the curving coast. The slow count to 100 became effortless, and my mind wandered, sometimes to Dar, mostly to Cata and Loop. The beach was silver in the sunlight, and the horses' hooves skittered as they grew used to the change in the surface. Out on the horizon, storms flashed over the sea, so distant we could not hear the rumble of thunder, only see the rolling clouds and the flashes of light forking up. I thought of the storm that carried off great-great-grandfather Rios's boat, and wondered if he'd been so far out in that wild sea. The ocean here seemed different, though really it was all connected and part of the same body of water. It was cartographers like Dar who parcelled it up on paper and named it, to make it easier for explorers and traders to mark it as their territory, just as the governor had marked Joya. Governor Adori brought us to a halt about a quarter of a mile away from where the map showed the village of Gris to be. "All right, men, be on your guard. Marquez, you come up to the front with me." Marquez rode up the formation, hissing as he passed, "Stay out of the way." "We advance slowly, then charge," continued Governor Adori. "So if we encounter anyone other than my daughter, we put them on the defensive and make them flee. Stay on your horses until I give the order. If you are separated from the group, follow this ridge back and wait at the river, understood?" The men nodded. Pablo's face was grim, his hand tensed around his small knife. The governor motioned for us to continue. I squeezed my heels, the mare blew out through her nostrils and moved forward. The horses began to trot. Ahead, a wall broken by an arch marked the village boundary. Governor Adori kicked his spurs into the horses' sides. I heard the unmistakable crack of Marquez's whip on the flank of his stallion. I flicked the reins and leapt up out of the saddle like Pablo said to. The horses broke into a gallop, and as the men yelled, I felt my blood rushing through me. We pounded through the arch, the yell dying in my throat when I saw what lay beyond. The village was gone. Only the crumbling fragments of mud walls and cracked streets remained. In a doorway was a sun-bleached skeleton, an adult's arm, outstretched towards a smaller formation of bones. My own arms felt leaden as I tried to will the bones into something else. A shadow fell across my neck, but there was no one behind except Pablo. The governor jerked his horse to a stop and dismounted in one fluid moment. The village had been razed, and at a glance it was obvious we were alone. The sea murmured beyond the houses, the blue of the men's tunics the only colour nearby. Bones and clay snapped under boots and hooves, but I was careful not to tread on anything. Together, we led the horses to what was once a village square, much like Gramera's. As we reached the centre, a voice rang out. "Stop!" We spun round towards Pablo, still mounted on his horse. We followed his gaze. Under our feet ran a thick black line. I glanced around and saw another line intersecting where the governor stood, forming an X that divided the square. Scattered across the cross were white seeds. I reeled back as I realised it was dried blood that marked the X. The men shouted and ran from the cross, pulling their horses with them, scuffing the dust from their feet. But that was not the worst of it. Those pale objects were not seeds at all. They were teeth. The governor stepped forward and picked one up, laying it on his gloved palm to examine it. A hush descended. Pablo dismounted and stood beside me, so close I could smell a faint trace of the lavender Masha washed their clothes with. I looked skyward towards the unrelenting grey, waiting for Governor Adori to speak. Finally he said, "These are not human. At least, not like any human teeth I've ever seen." He held out his hand and Marquez strode over. Both men regarded the tooth, and Marquez took it and nodded. Heavy too, he agreed. The tooth was passed around the others. Not wanting to take it in my bare hand, I looked at it lying in George's palm. It was shaped like a dog's tooth, only sharper, the serrations deep and irregular. The root was blackened, as if the gum were diseased. I swallowed and looked away. What happened here? Marquez spoke almost to himself. I looked around. Judging by the rubble and the bones, the village and its inhabitants had been destroyed years ago. But was it possible the cross could lay undisturbed all that time? The ravens that flooded Gomera's streets would surely have scavenged here. Something clicked into place. Scanning what was left of the roofs and the far-off forest, I realised I hadn't seen a single raven since entering the Forgotten Territories. No animals at all. Not the wolves that had once stalked the forest like a plague, and no sign of the deer or boar Dad said used to be abundant on the island. Like the songbirds, the ravens had gone. Pablo. I turned just as something far behind him moved. I focused on the spot, hoping it had been a trick of the shadow, but it moved again. Towards the horses now, low to the ground, almost as dark as the cliffs behind it, moving with a slow, rolling gait. Fear flashed through me, and my feet were released as if cut from a rope. Over there! The governor's men reacted fast, standing back to back at the centre of the X, forming a circle with each man facing outwards, holding his weapon ready. There was a moment when nothing moved, when they flooded from the forest. We were suddenly surrounded, my vision blocked by broken walls and shadows. Protect the governor, Marquez yelled. I thrust a hand inside the satchel and gripped the handle of Dad's weapon. I let the bag drop to the ground as I pulled out the blade. It was not a moment too soon. I only caught a glimpse of a dark grey body before being thrown backwards. I slashed the air. All around was noise. The governor was barking out orders, the chickens emitting high-pitched clucks from the cages lashed to the cook's saddle. The horses were baying, and through the white edges of panic I saw the flash of their eyes rolling back. My elbows and knees were pinned down, nails gouging into my neck. I tried to roll, to get free, but my assailant held on. Pain sang across my scalp as my head was pressed into the nubs of teeth beneath me. My name was shouted from somewhere behind me, not Gabo's name, but my own, and in the next moment the creature was barreled off as Pablo threw it aside. He held a shattered door in his hands and swung it at a shadowy blur attacking Marquez. Another creature leapt on me, wrapping its tail or vine around my neck. I twisted, swinging the blade wildly. I tore at the claws, the hand that was pulling the vine tighter, and my scrabbling fingers caught another vine or string around my attacker's knit wrist. As it broke, I brought the blade up. There was an awful feeling of the blade catching, then tearing. The pressure on my chest suddenly vanished. I tasted blood in my mouth, but it was not mine. I sat up, ready to leap to my feet, but instead saw a thin trail of dark red leading away across the square. Pablo was doubled up and panting nearby. The governor wiped his blade in the dust. The Marquez's other eye was swelling, his clothes ripped to shreds. The ambush was over, as quickly as it begun. The ringing in my ears faded slowly, the locket pressing hard against my chest. Any losses, Marquez, said Governor Odori. All accounted for, Governor. The cook was standing by the snapped tether of his vanished horse, saying loud and fast, my chickens, they're gone. I spun around, heart sinking. The bay mare was gone. Miss Large Cage seemed nowhere to be seen. What were they? Said Marquez, spitting to the dust. The banished? The governor looked around the village, casting about for clues. Can we be sure they were men, not animals? They came up so fast, Cook said, eyes wide. Why did they retreat? Mused Governor Odori. Pablo held out his hand as I reached up. Something dropped from my fist. I looked down and felt the air leave my lungs. Isabella, said Pablo softly, but I could not look at him. I was staring at what was lying on the dusty ground strewn with blood and teeth. A lump the size of a locket rose in my throat. What's that? Said Pablo. He crouched down and picked it up. On his broad palm lay a thin bracelet, its ragged ends where I'd pulled it free. Twisted in with the threads was a single shimmering line of gold. It's Lupe's. What? It's Lupe's, I repeated. I made it for her birthday. Are you sure? Croaked Pablo. Yes, I said, forcing my eyes to meet his. I made it. I tied it on her wrist. How did you get it? A vine around my neck, my own nails scratching to get free. Runts, we need to get moving, said Marquez, crossing to us. The others had already untied the rest of the horses. One more was missing aside from mine and Cook's. Gabbo found something. What is it? Said Marquez. I tried to stop my voice shaking. The bracelet. Marquez looked down. This? He pushed it off Pablo's palm and scuffed the string into the dust with his boot. Don't, I cried. It's loops. Loops? The governor's voice carried across the square. Even the sea, cresting out of sight beyond the broken home, seemed to fall silent. This scrap, said Marquez, kicking the bracelet towards Governor Adori. The boy seems to think it belongs to your daughter. Governor did not speak for a moment. He crouched down beside the bracelet. I could hear him breathing. His head bowed. He gently ran his finger along the length of string, the gold thread glinting. It does? Sir, said Marquez. How are you sure it's hers? The governor glanced sharply at me. My sister made it for her. Isabella. I tried not to blink. For her birthday. How did you get it? Said Marquez. One of them was wearing it. Governor Adori stood up abruptly. We have to follow them. Sir, we don't even know where or what they are. They are cowards taking a child. If it was the banished, we need to stay away from them. They have my daughter. Sir, I don't think she's, started Marquez. Suddenly, Adori's blade was drawn, pressed to Marquez's neck. I grasped, and beside me Pablo took a small step back. There's no body, Marquez, so I suggest you don't finish that thought. He pressed harder. Do I make myself clear? Marquez nodded. Governor Adori swung round. Good. Any more questions? Nobody spoke. His eyes were wild. Everyone saddle up. Sir, said Pablo hesitantly, they took some of the horses. The Cooks, Gabbo's. Those without horses, make your way back, except the Mat boy. Adori glanced at me. We need you. I heard him as though from a great height, as I put Luke's bracelet in my pocket. The locket hung heavy around my neck, and I pressed it to my chest through my tunic. I could not let calling her rotten be the last thing I said to her. I'd been wrong about her being a coward. I wanted to tell her she was brave. I wanted to tell her I wished I was as brave as her. The expedition shrank to 7. Those with bloodied clothes discarded them for fresh. The governor had to lend Marquez a set of his royal blue trousers and tunic. Who should we call the governor now, George? The laugh dying in his throat at the look on Adori's face. We saddled the remaining horses. I climbed up behind Pablo, too shy to put my arms around his waist until he made me. After twisting to watch the village of bones fade from sight, I pulled my map materials out and continued marking the distance. You don't have to do that, said Pablo gently. You should rest. I ignored him. I did have to do this. The quill seemed the only solid thing in the world. Please, Luke, be all right. And that is the end of chapter 11. So, very dramatic, that chapter. So obviously they've gone to this village, Gris, or Gris, however you pronounce it, and they've been expecting, we think, to find a village of, the sort that people be living there or working or having a life, but it was empty apart from this strange cross of blood on the floor and the teeth. And then they were attacked, ambushed by, well, it sounded like animals, the descriptions of the claws and of the shadowy blur that they were. It didn't sound like humans, but no one seemed to get a clear enough, look to work out what they were. And then Isabella found Luke's bracelet, and one of the creatures or beings was wearing it. So that doesn't foreshadow a very positive outlook for Luke. However, we have to find out what happens, and hopefully it won't be as dire as it's suggested at this point, but we're definitely at the kind of crux point of the book. And if you look sort of where I am in the story, we're about halfway through. Chapters get a little bit longer, and we obviously stay in this sort of territory for a little bit longer. In fact, I can tell you now, we stay here in the Forgotten Territories until the end of chapter 17. So rest of this week and a couple of days next week. And then in total in the book, there are, bear with me, 25 chapters. So we are approaching the halfway point. So things are hotting up. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will be back tomorrow for chapter 12. Bye.